somebody, meaning somebody might have inserted it later on, because they used to do that. They didn't have copy paste and photocopying, and no, they used to have scribes writing it out. So it's possible that if a mistake is found in one book, it was a person that had transcribed it wrong, that written it out wrong. But in 7 of his books, he mentioned that the universe is eternal, that it has no beginning. And Az-Zarkashi in Tashnif al-Masami', he mentions in a book which is an explanation of a book in Usul, Az-Zarkashi, he said that the ijma', the consensus, is upon the matter that the philosophers that said that the universe has no beginning, all of them, whether they said it this way or that way, they differed, but they all in all said a universe or a part of it has no beginning. Az-Zarkashi said that all of the Muslim scholars judge these people to be kuffar. All of them. Now, if this is found in the books of Ibn Taymiyyah, in 7 of his books, then the judgment stands. So this is beneficial to mention here when we mention the eternity of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, to say that Allah is the only one that exists without a beginning. We discussed al-baqa, we discussed as-sama', Allah is attributed with an eternal hearing. Al-basar, Allah is attributed with eternal sight. Now, this attribute, the next attribute we're going to mention, is very, very important to understand. This attribute, like all of the attributes of Allah that we affirm, we mention what Allah mentioned in the Quran. We attribute to Allah what Allah attributed to Himself. So Allah revealed in the Quran, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. This ayah, in it, there is an attribution of an attribute to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. This attribute is known as the Kalam of Allah. So, because Allah revealed وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا, because Allah revealed takliman, we say that this is not metaphorical. This is reality. Really, Allah is attributed with this attribute called Al-Kalam. Al-Kalam, and okay, after this, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا مِنْكُم مِّنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا سَيُكَلِّمُهُ رَبُّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهُ تَرْجُمَانٍ. That Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will yukallim all of His slaves on the Day of Judgment, and there will be no need for an interpreter between Allah and the slaves. Like we all know, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala on the Day of Judgment will not be on earth. Allah exists and will always exist without a place. So this attribute, because Allah revealed it in the Quran, and because the Prophet ﷺ affirmed it in the Hadith, we attribute it to Allah. Now, to support that even further, otherwise, obviously, the Quran is enough for us, and the Hadith, of the authentic Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is enough. To further support that, the intellect also bears witness to this matter, that Allah is attributed with an attribute, and it is by this attribute that Allah conveys. It is by this attribute that Allah reveals to the creation what is halal, what is haram. By this attribute, Allah orders the creation to do things and forbids them from doing things. This attribute of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is one with which Allah conveys. Just as Allah with His sight does what? Sees. Allah with His hearing hears. Allah by His knowledge knows. right? By these attributes. By his kalam, Allah conveys and clarifies to the creation what they are being ordered to do and what they are being prohibited from. Because Allah created us on this earth. And the intellect also says, this is what Al-Maturidiyya mentioned, they said that it befits the eternal and everlasting knowledge of Allah and the wisdom of Allah that if Allah creates people on earth, then Allah would send warners and teachers who would teach what it is that you have to do on the earth, what is it that you can't do on the earth. Anyway, so this attribute is called al-kalam. This kalam of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is not a language. Kalam, which if you want to translate it, speech. But this eternal and everlasting speech of Allah is not a language. Why? Now, the Wahhabiyya, wal-'iyadhu billah, they will say, brazen-faced, they will say that Allah speaks in Arabic. They'll say to you, they'll open the Quran and they'll say, for example, who said ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ? They'll say, is this the saying of Allah or not? They'll say to you, who said عَمَّ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ? And what they want you to say is that this is the saying of Allah, that this is the kalam of Allah, meaning the attribute of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But we know that the attribute of Allah is eternal and everlasting. It is not like the creation. The words in the Quran, these letters, these shapes, they are obviously created. They had beginnings. The Arabic language, it had a beginning. The first one to speak Arabic amongst the humans was Adam alayhi salatu wassalam. Likewise, all the other books that were revealed in Hebrew, for example, like At-Tawrah, and all of the other books that were revealed in the different languages. That doesn't mean that Allah speaks in those languages. These languages, Allah created them. So they have a beginning. Given they have a beginning, this tells us they are in need. Hence they are weak. So the Wahhabi will try to convince you that you saying ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ, that you reciting this, or that you looking in the Quran and reading this from the book, he will try to say to you, this is the kalam of Allah. This is what the Wahhabiyya say. They say that the speech of Allah is letters and sounds. Letters and sounds. And that has so many implications, so many consequences. Like, for example, when one of us says, ذَلِكَ, a second before I said it, you couldn't hear it because it didn't exist at that time. When I said that, it started. The attributes of Allah are not like this. They don't exist to come into existence. And then when I say ذَلِكَ, I've said the tha and the la starts. The tha has finished. The la has started. The la finishes, the kaf starts. And the kaf finishes and then it elapses. If this was the speech of Allah, then it would mean that it comes into existence and then it is annihilated. It comes into existence, then it goes. It comes and goes. This is a sign of weakness. So this attribute of Allah Ta'ala, which is His kalam, is not a language. It's not made up of letters. And it is not a sound. It is not a sound. Again, here someone might say, like the Wahhabiyya do, well, how can you say speech of Allah then? The Wahhabiyya, they say that, oh, you can say about Allah hand, that He has a hand, but not like our hand. But we say to them, you can't say this. Because the hand only ever means this, right? So they might say to you, well, how can you say speech about Allah then? Because we do say Allah has speech, but not like our speech. Allah has hearing, not like our hearing. Allah It's attributed with life, but not like our life. Why is it that we can say speech? And why is speech in this sense not the same as hand? Because speech, it can carry the meaning that befits Allah. In other words, speech can carry a meaning that is completely different to the meaning of speech when it is attributed to a creation. So what are we saying about the speech of Allah? It's not a language because our speech is a language, right? It's not the speech of Allah is not a sound because our speech is a sound. The speech of Allah is not made up of letters because our speech is made up of letters. The speech of Allah does not have a beginning because our speech has a beginning. The speech of Allah does not have an end because our speech has an end. You can't say the same for hand. For the hand, what are they going to say? Oh, we attribute the Wahhabiyya. Are they going to say we attribute the word hand to Allah, but it's not like our hand? Well, then there is no proper meaning for hand other than this. And they say, oh, you can't be metaphorical. Because if they had said hand metaphorically, then sometimes we do say it's in the hand of God, meaning that it's in the power of God. It's in God's control. But they make a point, say, no, you can't be non-literal. So if you're taking the word hand literally, it has to mean this. As for kalam in the Arabic language, or al-qawl, it can mean other than a sound, other than what has a beginning and an end and so on. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is attributed with speech. This is the saying of Ahlul Sunnah. This is the saying of Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, who the Wahhabiyya call Abu Jifa. They call him father of the corpse because they hate Abu Hanifa. And they slyly stab at him. They say he was weak in hadith. And they say many things about him, subhanAllah. They don't like him. Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, who was among the Salaf, they claim to be Salafiyya. This was one of the Salaf. He said, Allahu yatakallam la ka kalamina. Allah speaks, but not like we speak. He said, نحن نتكلم بالآلة والحرف. We speak with tools and instruments, voice box and tongue, and نحن نتكلم بالآلة والحرف, and with letters. And Abu Hanifa said, والله يتكلم لا بالآلة ولا بالحرف. As for Allah, His speech is without letters and without the need for all these instruments. So then the question arises, can we say that we hear, or that the people on the Day of Judgment will hear the kalam of Allah? The answer is yes. Everybody on the Day of Judgment will hear the speech of Allah. Someone might say, wait a second. You just said that the speech of Allah is not a sound. Yes, Ahlul Sunnah said true. The speech of Allah is not a sound. So then someone might say, well, how can it be heard if it's not a sound? The scholars, especially the Asha'ira, rahimahumullah, said that it's not a condition for something to be heard that it be a sound. And they explained this. They said, look, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala sees absolutely everything. They said, because Allah created everything, He sees everything. What does everything mean? Everything that we would usually consider seeable and everything that we wouldn't usually consider seeable. So they said Allah can see everything that exists. Sounds exist, smells exist. Sounds, smells, tastes, all of these exist. Ahlul Sunnah said, because they exist, Allah can see them. Right? Likewise, they said, sounds exist, smells exist, tastes exist. They said, because they exist, Allah can hear them. Allah hears absolutely everything that exists. And some of these things that exist that Allah can hear aren't sounds. Is a smell a sound? It's not a sound. Is a taste a sound? Okay, sour or sweet? It's not. But they said Allah can see all of these things, and Allah can hear all of these things. So the speech of Allah, which is not a sound, can also be heard. It doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end. Everyone on the Day of Judgment will hear the kalam of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Had it been the case that the speech of Allah was sounds and letters, then Allah would not have said in the Quran, وَهُوَ أَسْرَعُ الْحَاسِبِينَ, that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala will have questioned the people on the Day of Judgment very quickly. Very quickly. If it was the case that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala spoke with letters and sounds and judged every person, as sometimes the Wahhabiyya make out, as though Allah ta'ala will be in the front in a place, things to his left, things to his right, things below him, things above him, and people come one by one like they do in court, and he asks them, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الْكُفُرِ, asks them. If Allah like this was to ask, because he supposedly speaks with letters and sounds, every single person, then right now, forget Ya'juj and Ma'juj, which are a hidden group of people. And there are other hidden tribes also that are mentioned in the religion that we don't know about. On the earth, among the humans that we know about, there are about what? 8 billion at this time. Okay? 8 billion, 9 billion, however many there are. So think about all of the people all the way back to Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam's time, including the jinn. If Allah spoke with letters and sounds and questioned the slaves about all their doings, look at Iblis. From the time that he existed, even before Adam alayhi salatu wasalam came to earth, if he was to be held to account for everything that he did, which he will be held to account for everything that he did. But if Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala spoke with letters and sounds, the account of Iblis alone would take more than 50,000 years, and that is the length of the Day of Judgment. So Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala mentioned, huwa asra'ul hasibin, meaning that the questioning of the slaves, it is only one stage among the 50 stages of the Day of Judgment. And that can only occur if it is as it is that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, his speech is not like the speech of the creation. To give you an example, if there were 3 or 4 people here, and I said that when I knock on the table, I want you to leave, I want you to sit down, I want you to lay down, I want you to climb the wall, right? If I did that, then what would happen? 4 or 5 different people will understand something different from it. Like this, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, when he gives people the ability to hear his speech, which is not like the speech of the creation, some people on the plains of resurrection will understand that they are being rewarded. And they will be pleased with that. And some people, they will understand from the speech of Allah that they are being reprimanded. And this will make them sad. This will make them sad, and they will feel the torture. So the speech of Allah is not like the speech of the creation in any way. It's not a continuous humming, a monotonous, continuous humming that goes on forever and ever. This is creation. So the kalam of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is an eternal and everlasting attribute by which Allah speaks. To say he speaks with sounds and letters, like sometimes they portray in films, sometimes they might portray in cartoons that Moses went to the burning bush and then they have a booming, deep, heavy sound of the voice of a human saying, I am God, or something like that. This is kufr. For someone to say that this is the voice of Allah, or that this is how Allah speaks, or even to portray it like that, this is not permissible. Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah did not accept this. This is something that this is an agenda that the Wahhabiyya, the so-called Salafiyya, push forward. This is not permissible. So this attribute of Allah, which is his eternal kalam, It is the attribute with which he orders. Isn't it that the Prophet ﷺ heard the kalam of Allah on the night of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj? He heard it. What did he understand? He understood that the 5 obligatory prayers have been made fard. The 5 prayers have been made fard. Allah ordered that with what? With his kalam. Like that, all the other attributes, like that, all the other obligations, they came from the kalam of Allah, tabaraka wa ta'ala. And there are other details, but also the prohibitions, they came like this, through the kalam of Allah. So the eternal, without a beginning, speech of Allah is the attribute with which he orders, forbids, promises and warns. Promises with paradise. People who do good deeds and they believe they will be in جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا. They will be in gardens underneath which rivers flow and they will remain there perpetually. And it is the attribute, kalam, with which he warns of hell, warns of the torture in hell. So it's not like the speech of the creation, but rather it does not have a beginning. This is something that needs to be buried deep in the mind, something that needs to be known. It needs to be engraved in the heart that all the attributes of Allah, they are without a beginning. Allah is without beginning. There's no start to Allah. Allah did not start and begin to exist. Likewise, all his attributes, they did not begin or start. They weren't initiated. Rather, they have always existed, just as Allah has always existed. It does not, this speech of Allah, does not resemble the speech of the creation. It is not a voice. It is not a voice that occurs due to the flowing of air or the collision of physical entities, such as teeth. Nor is the kalam of Allah a letter or made up of letters, words. Letters that end by the closing of lips or the motion of a tongue. And we believe that Musa alayhi salam heard the kalam of Allah without it being a letter or a sound. So what happened? When Musa alayhi salam was called and he saw the burning tree, there was a tree that was burning and Musa alayhi salam saw it. So he approached. There, what happened? Now, just to make it very clear, look, right now, we know Allah is not bound by time. And if a Muslim was to be asked, if he was asked, does Allah exist right now? You'd say, yeah, of course he exists, right? If a Muslim was asked, is Allah attributed with power right now? You'd say, yeah, of course, he's powerful, of course. Like that, if someone was asked, is Allah alive right now? You'd say, yeah, Allah is alive, of course. Like that, if someone was to ask, is Allah speaking right now? You'd say, yeah, Allah is speaking. Allah is mutakallim. Allah yatakallam. Allah is attributed with speech. Allah is not mute. Right? So right now, Allah is powerful. Allah is seeing, hearing, speaking. Right? But, okay, so we say Allah exists. Can we see Allah in this life? No. Can we see Allah right now? No. But He exists. Okay. So the people of paradise will see Allah, and we can't imagine that. He will be without a place, as He is now, obviously. And so how will that happen? That will happen because Allah will give us the ability to see Him. Okay. Like that, Musa alayhi salam, he went to the burning tree, and there Allah created within Musa the ability to hear the speech of Allah. Does it mean Allah started to talk? No, because Allah is always speaking. He's always attributed with speech. So what started? Musa's ability to hear. Just like the people in paradise when they are once a week going to be given, or some people in paradise, once a week when they are given the ability to see Allah. Allah will create within them that ability. That doesn't mean that Allah will start to exist. Of course, Allah exists. Rather, they will start to see Allah, and then that ability will be taken away. They will not see Allah until the next time. Like that, Musa alayhi salatu wassalam, Allah eternally willed to create an ability within the ears of Musa alayhi salam by which Musa alayhi salam heard the kalam of Allah. Not a language, not a letter, not a sound. He heard it and he understood things from it. He understood from it that Allah revealed to him, Inni ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni wa aqim as-salata li dhikri. Allah revealed to him, La ilaha illa ana. It is I, Allah. There is no God other than me. And then he understood other things. Ma tilka bi yaminika ya Musa. What is that in your right hand, O Musa? But Allah, tabaraka wa ta'ala, remember his speech is not like the speech of the creation. So anybody who believes that Allah said, like we say, with lips and tongue, these words, Ma tilka biyaminika ya Musa, this is kufr. This is kufr. How would a person liken Allah to the creation like that? How would they liken an attribute of Allah to an attribute, the speech of the creation? So Musa alayhi salam began to hear the kalam of Allah when Musa was in that place. Then this ability was taken away. It was given. It was bestowed upon Musa alayhi salam, and then when he heard what he needed to hear, it was taken away. Not as a punishment, it was taken away because this was what Allah had eternally willed. And then Musa alayhi salam returned to his people. So Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, all of the Salaf believe Musa alayhi salam heard the eternal, or rather, the Salaf said that we believe that Musa alayhi salam heard the eternal kalam of Allah. Some of Ahlus Sunnah said something else. Some of them said something else, but it's not against the rules of the religion the way the Wahhabiyya said it. Anyway, we believe that Musa alayhi salam heard the eternal kalam of Allah without it being a letter or sound. Just as we believe that the Muslim will see the that of Allah, will see Allah in the hereafter without Allah being a particle or a physical attribute, meaning he will be without a place. This is because the intellect, so how is it that we can hear the speech of Allah, which is not a sound? This is because the intellect does not judge as impossible the hearing of that which is not a letter or a sound. Meaning, does the intellect say, if something is not a sound, you can't hear it? No, the intellect doesn't say that. The intellect says, even if something is not a sound, you can still hear it. So the speech of Allah, which is not a sound, can be heard. So in the past, you can say both. So you can say that Musa heard the speech of Allah. That's perfectly fine. But sometimes when you teach a new person, you might say Musa alayhi salam understood certain things from the speech of Allah, so that you don't say to them off the bat that he heard. But then they might say, well, you just said that the speech of Allah is not a sound, right? So you might use that to try to ease them into it. Why is it that we have to use these ways of easing people into things? Because many of them haven't learned. Many of them haven't learned things that they would learn when they were younger, that they would have learned when they were younger, but they didn't. And the kalam of the Dhat of Allah is not composed of a series of letters occurring one after the other, as is the case for our speech. The explanation that the phrase kalam of Allah is said in reference to the attribute of Allah, and this is not a letter or a sound. So you can say the kalam of Allah, right? You can say the words, the speech of Allah. You can say some other words also. And what is meant by them is the eternal attribute of Allah. Musa, what did he hear? Kalamullah, right? Okay. What did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam hear on the night of Al-Mi'raj? He heard Kalamullah, the eternal attribute of Allah that we cannot imagine. Fine. This word Kalamullah, you can use it for something else as well. You can use the word Kalamullah for the book of the Quran. The book which is the Mus'haf, which a lot of people nowadays call the Quran. This book, Al-Mus'haf, okay, the book of the Quran, you can say about it, if somebody says, oh, what's that? Like, what does it say on that line? You could say Kalamullah. You could say Kalamullah. It obviously does not mean the same thing. It doesn't mean, this line here, this is the eternal and everlasting attribute of Allah that we can't imagine. No, we can see it. It's letters and sounds and its shapes. It's curvy here, it's straight there, it's like a loop there. We know that this had a beginning, but we can still call it Kalamullah with the meaning that Allah revealed it. With the meaning that Allah revealed it. Just as the original Injil, the original gospel, you could say about it Kalamullah because Allah revealed it. Likewise, the original Torah, the Torah, we could say about it Kalamullah, the writing, the letters, we could say about them Kalamullah because it was revealed by Allah. These phrases that we say, we recite and we seek reward by reciting them, they were revealed by Allah. It was narrated, it was transmitted from Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, who was among the Salaf. So he was truly Salafi. He lived for a while during the first 100 years after Hijrah, and he died in the year 150. He said, Wallahu yatakallamu la bi'alatin wa harf. Allah speaks without an instrument or a tool, meaning, like I mentioned before, the voice box and the tongue. And Allah speaks without an instrument and without letters. And he said, وَنَحْنُ نَتَكَلَّمُ بِآلَةٍ وَحَرْفٍ. And we speak with an instrument, meaning instruments, and a letter. So let this matter be understood well. Hence, the matter is not as the mushabbiha. A mushabbih is any person who likens Allah to the creation. The Karramiyah, they were amongst the first people who were mushabbiha. Al-Karramiyya. Some students of Al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Karramiyya, they were anthropomorphists. They attributed bodily attributes to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Even if one was to say that Allah, for example, has a hand but not like our hand, he's attributed Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala with a body part. Even if nowadays the anthropomorphists, Mujassim of today say, oh, but we don't say Allah has a body. No one ever said Allah has a body. Is what they say. No, they say no one ever said Allah has a body. We never say that Allah has a body. Yeah, but saying Allah is above necessitates that he'd be a volume, a size, and a shape. So it's the same thing. It amounts to the same thing. Hence, the matter is not as the Mushabbiha say, that the Salaf did not used to say that Allah speaks with a speech which is not a letter. This is what they claim. They say the Salaf never said that. But rather that this is an innovation of the Ash'aris, supposedly. This statement of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa is confirmed and is mentioned in one of his 5 booklets. It's actually in Al-Fiqh al-Akbar. Moreover, Abu Hanifa said that the one who believes that the attributes of Allah are created, this person is a kafir. Likewise, the one who doubts about this issue or stops. And quite fittingly, we're going to stop here, inshallah. Next time we'll speak about the word Al-Quran and what it actually means. Nowadays we usually use the word Al-Quran to refer to the book, but originally it has a different meaning. So we'll speak about that, inshallah ta'ala. This, to know the details of this attribute very well is very important. It's among the first things you teach a person. After teaching a person that Allah is not like the creation, and you speak about him being without place and that you cannot imagine him in the mind, our Shaykh radiyallahu anhu used to instruct that among the first three things is to speak about the kalam of Allah. Because this is one of those things that many people are misguided about. Many people. And the books of the scholars are full of what we just mentioned, of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. You look, Ibn Hajar, Al-Suyuti, Al-Baqillani, Al-Ash'ari, Al-Bayhaqi, Al-Iraqi, hundreds of Sunni scholars spoke about these issues, especially pertaining to the kalam of Allah. The details, some of the ones we're mentioning now, in the past, 6 and 7-year-olds used to memorize. These things, they used to have them in poetry form. They used to make the children memorize poetry that had all these details of the attributes within it. But nowadays, because people have left seeking out the personal obligatory knowledge, it seems like something strange to them. The Prophet ﷺ said that a time would come when again people would hear the truth and they'd say, wow, what's that? Who said that? We've never heard that before. Or they'd just reject it because they've never heard it. This is exactly what used to happen in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when he would call people to al-Islam, because most of them had been worshipping idols. So this was what they had in mind, the idols. If you want something, you'd go to the idol, you'd slaughter an animal in front of it, and then you'd ask it. They would ask it. Or they would go into the Kaaba and they would have an idol there which they used to call Hubal. They used to ask it certain things and it would just sit there. It's made of stone. This is the mentality. So when they heard the Prophet ﷺ saying, La ilaha illallah, there's no God but Allah. These idols are not God. Then they say, who is this? Where's he come from? What's he saying? Our fathers and grandfathers and forefathers have always worshipped these idols. What's this strange thing? So the Prophet ﷺ said, Tuba lil ghuraba, that those people that teach and learn and then spread the religious knowledge in the later times, i.e. now, when Islam becomes like something strange, then these people, insha'Allah, will these are glad tidings for those people, insha'Allah ta'ala. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us to follow in their footsteps and make us among them, insha'Allah. Let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim.